Greetings, Thunder Wizards. Okay, so this is very different from a lot of the stuff that I talk about, but if you have the ability to sit through and to listen to some of the things I'm going to be presenting to you, and you listen to my ranting and my raving, you will most likely have an interesting awareness, because when I thought about it, it brought a really wonderful awareness to me. So, we're going to be talking about what the original understanding of Noah's Ark was. So before we go into that, I first have to address what most of you know about Noah's Ark, which is the story written in the Hebrew Old Testament, the story about Noah and the story about Jehovah coming to Noah and saying that he has found human beings to be evil and corrupt and he's going to destroy them by a flood, but he'll save Noah and his family, and Noah has to go out and save all the animals and all of that kind of stuff. So, I expect that besides my normal viewership, there will probably be some fundamentalist born again Christians who will want to come on here, and it'll be interesting to see what the responses are. But, look, I'm not a born again Christian. I used to be many years ago, but I'm not now. And I'm going to say things that will most likely upset you. I have no interest in debating you or being, insulted by you. Please feel free to go watch another channel if you want. But if you want to know the real story behind Noah's Ark and what it really meant, then keep listening because it'll blow your mind. All right, so now we first need to address Noah because that's how we know about Noah's Ark is Noah. But the Old Testament, as we know it now, actually was written down, and I may have this wrong, the exact times. It's very easy to look up because it was written down during the Babylonian captivity. For those of you who are Christians, you know what I'm talking about. You've heard this talked about in Sunday school or in church. The Babylonian captivity, I believe 350 BC. I believe that's when it was. So less than 2,500 years ago. So the actual written text of the Old Testament was not written down until then. If that sounds like that's too recent, this is not up for debate. Even Christian and Jewish scholars accept the historicity of that fact, that in terms of writing it down, it was written down during the Babylonian captivity by the Jewish priests who were taken into captivity at that time. So we also know that at the time of the Babylonian captivity, right up until that time, we know this from archaeological evidence, it's indisputable, that the Jewish people, the people of Judea, because at that time the nation of Israel had split into two nations, Samaria, is that right? The Samaritans and the Judeans. And so there was already this, they disliked each other, and the Judeans felt themselves superior. We don't really know how the Samaritans felt, but we know that the Judeans felt themselves superior, and that's why by the time you get to the New Testament, there's the Samaritans. Samaritans are looked down poorly. But they were once one nation, they split off, and the Judea at that time was a vassal state to the Babylonians. The Babylonians were charging them taxes. That's what happens when big empires go around and they go to the smaller guys and they say, hey, if you don't want us to attack you, you pay us taxes. And so the Judean elite, the priests and the political elite, decided to rebel and decided not to pay taxes. And as a result, the Babylonians said, "Oh, yeah." And they came down with their army and they leveled the temple. Then they took the priests and the political elite and took them into captivity. And that lasted for 70 years, and it is known as the Babylonian captivity. Why is all that important? Because it was during the Babylonian captivity that the Noah story was written down. As it so happens, we also know from textual evidence, I mean, this is not up for debate either, the story of the flood and the story of the ark and the saving of the animals, that is also an extremely old writing. And I don't know how far back that goes. That goes back much further back than the writing down of the Judean Old Testament. And so we know the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I believe is, I think that's the Assyrian one. But the oldest one is a Babylonian one. And the name of the person is not Noah. His name is Astrahasis. I'm going to get into that in a moment. So I need to, because this bugs me, I have to sew this thing up. So basically, here's what you need to know. The Judeans hijacked an existing myth, one that had been around and had been retold multiple times. So by the time it was the Epic of Gilgamesh, it had already been rewritten and reformed multiple times, but it was basically the same. And what we need to understand is that, as I said earlier, the Judeans were polytheists. They did not worship the one God Jehovah. The way that the Old Testament wants to tell you it happened, we know that that is not how it happened. I'm sorry, but you cannot dispute, real textual and historical evidence. The entire myth of Moses and the children of Israel being released from slavery in Egypt and wandering the desert for 40 years and then going in and attacking and basically holocausting the Canaanites, none of that happened either. And I talk about that at length, but the short answer is that when the Judean elite, the priests and the political elite, were taken into captivity, here's what I think happened. The political elite turned to the priests and said, "You told us that if we built a temple to Jehovah and if we kept his flame lit and did all the rituals and sacrifices to Jehovah, that he would protect us. That's why we didn't pay taxes, because you told us that Jehovah was the protector of the state of Judea and he would protect us." Now, as it turns out, Jehovah, Yahweh, is not even a Judean deity. As I understand it, it came from the Midianites, which was, a whole different thing. But before the Babylonian captivity, Yahweh was worshipped by the elite and by the priests as the state god, and there was a state religion. And then there was what everybody did at home. They would go and they would do the state rituals and yay, Judea's great. And then they would go home and they would go to their altars. We know this because from archaeological evidence, we see from the altars that they worshiped the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, whatever the names for that were, and the fertility gods and goddesses and all of that. They had their little idols there. We see this. Their altars with the little idols. All the Judean people had this until the Babylonian captivity, and then disappears from the record. After 70 years, whatever it is, the Babylonian Empire fell, and they left. A lot of the Judeans didn't go back to Judea. They did other things, but those that wanted power came back, and they brought with them this new mythology. an invented mythology that didn't happen. The mythology that said that they were coming to conquer the Canaanites and they were going to wipe out the Canaanites, and that Jehovah had given them this land. That never happened. And they know, and the people who first heard it knew that it had never happened, because they had been following the mythology of the Canaanites, because the Hebrew people are none other than the direct descendants of the Canaanites. In fact, if you look in the Old Testament, I don't know the exact quotation, but it says something to the effect of that Hebrew is the language of the Canaanites. If you look for it, you will find it. And so what this means is that they were rewriting their national identity, and they were using politics to do it. And they mandated a new religion wherein the Canaanite religion was going to be destroyed, and the polytheist religion was going to be destroyed, and they were going to put in place of it the state, the sole worship of the state god of Judea, which was Yahweh. And they put the 10 Commandments in there, and they repeated 3 times that he was the only God to worship. When you repeat yourself, it means you're insecure and you're trying to overcome something. I know, because I do it all the time. They repeated themselves 3 times, where Jehovah had to say 3 times in the commandments that thou shalt have no other gods before me, or words to that effect. And then anybody who worshipped any other gods would be put to death. So this is what happened. I want you to understand this, because the story of Noah has been changed so radically from its original story, to have God, Jehovah, doing this strange thing where he, on the one hand, decides he's going to destroy all human beings because they're evil and corrupt, and yet at the same time he's going to save them, and he's going to save all the animals. Now, if that sounds like he's, a little bit confused, there's a reason for that. So in order to understand that, we go back to the ancient Babylonian. So the Babylonians worshipped the gods known as the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki, the best translation that I can find of Anunnaki means the celestial powers. And that is interesting, because the Hebrew Old Testament, in the beginning of Genesis, they still held on to their Canaanite, a lot of their Canaanite mythology. Of course, they switched things around, but one thing they couldn't get rid of, because they knew people wouldn't accept it, was the idea of getting rid of the Anunnaki, which the Hebrews called the Elohim. Elohim is plural. It means the gods, specifically the council of the celestial gods. It's another word for the Anunnaki. Anunnaki means the celestial gods. Before you start going off on the Anunnaki and the reptilians and the aliens, let me just debunk that nonsense for a moment. The modern Anunnaki idea that Anunnakis are space travelers who came in spaceships, and they did genetic experiments. All the stuff you read about that, bear in mind, you're not reading the actual text of the mythology of the Anunnaki. You're not reading it. You're hearing it reinterpreted over and over again, the same way that the Judeans did with the Epic of Gilgamesh. They took the Epic of Gilgamesh, they reinterpreted it, they threw in a bunch of Hebrew this, and it made Yahweh the blah, blah, blah. They hijacked something else and reinterpreted it for their own propaganda. The whole Anunnaki is space aliens coming and creating humans, and then turning into the reptilians, turning into the elite who don't let you reincarnate. All of that nonsense is not what the Anunnaki were. The Anunnaki are nothing more than the mythological gods of the Babylonians, of Mesopotamia. That's all that they are. So, before people say, do your research, I have done my research. If you are one of those people who believes that the Anunnaki are these alien astronauts who came and blah, 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 I'd like for you to go and research a man named Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia, last name Sittshin. He wrote a bunch of novels in the 1970s where he started this. Actually, he didn't start it, but he rehashed this theory. And he was looking at the mythology of Mesopotamia and misinterpreting it and reinterpreting it and projecting all kinds of stuff, which then later David Icke took that, as well as a bunch of stuff he took from Blavatsky and the spiritualist movement of the 1890s and early 1900s. He hijacked that and turned that into his thing, and then he took Zecharia Sitchin's stuff and built on top of that. So that whole stuff is nonsense, which is sad, because when you look at real mythology, it actually is very spiritually empowering. And so we're going to look at that a little bit. I'm not going to get into the whole thing. I want to get to something I found really interesting, which is the actual ark itself. What was the ark? If you read the Noah version, the ark is this box. It's basically just this big coffin. It's a box. And in the Hebrew version, they have how big it is and how long and all that. Well, as it so happens, in the very first Babylonian text, Noah, whose name is Astrahashi, whose name translates into very intelligent man, or another way to interpret it would be in the enlightened human. So bear in mind, this is mythology. Mythology is doing two things. Mythology originally was never meant to be taken literally, never. The writers, or if you want to call it the channelers of true mythology, they may have expected that the average layperson would take it literally, and that was fine. But they also knew that intelligent people or spiritual teachers would not take it literally, that they would go deeper into the meanings of it and use it to improve their lives and to teach them so that they would evolve. The whole point of all mythology is human spiritual evolution. So if you understand that, then you look for symbols, and what do the symbols tell you? Names in true mythology. And what I'm saying is that the Judean text, the Old Testament Noah story, I don't find that to be true mythology at all. Because as I said, everything that's in the Old Testament has one purpose. It is designed to make you part of that national political party, basically. It's political propaganda. Because the entire message of the Old Testament is there's only one God, worship him or we will put you to death. Jews for Jews only. It sounds a lot like Trump. But that's basically what it was saying, is the Jews for Jews only, and let's get rid of all the foreigners, and let's just worship our God, and let's not worship any others, because then we might be like everybody around us, and we've been stomped on by all these foreigners for too long. That was the whole point of that. Because up until that point, the whole idea of Moses and all of that coming out of Israel, coming out of Egypt, none of that existed, because people before that time knew that they were in fact the Canaanites. So imagine it would be like today if some weird thing happened and all of the people of the American government were taken captive by who knows who, and then they escaped, and the world fell, the empire fell apart, and they came back with a new history. And in that history, they said that, pick somebody. I don't care who it was. For this example, let's use Donald Trump. They would say Donald Trump led the Americans to the new continent and destroyed what we'll call them the Trumpians. The Trumpians came back and destroyed the Americans, who were evil and corrupt. And so because of Trump leading the American people out of captivity and destroying the old American way, we are now Trumpians and whatever. That's what it was. The Hebrew people, both the Samaritans and the Judeans, knew that they were Canaanites. They knew that their ancestors were Canaanites. They knew that they worshiped the Canaanite gods, which were called the Elohim, the gods. One word for God is El. El was like the Sky Father. It was like he was the powerful God. Elohim means the gods, the powers. So that's the whole point. Any of that stuff. Anyway, I'm repeating myself, but it was all political propaganda. It's not true mythology. It is not designed to empower you and to help you to evolve. It is designed to keep you disempowered and an obedient servant of the state. That was the whole point of the Old Testament, and that's why it's so ridiculous that turned into a religion that is all over the world now for a nation that doesn't exist anymore. There's a new Israel now, but it's, what I mean? It's just like, it's crazy. Anyway, I'm getting off topic, as I often do. So Astrahasi means the evolved human. And in that, I believe it was Enlil. I could be wrong about that, but I believe it was the god Enlil had decided that there were too many people in the world. And so as a result, he was going to destroy all of the people by sending this flood. Now Enki decides that he is going to save life, including humans. So he goes to the enlightened human, Astrahasi, and he tells him to build a boat. And he tells him to save life. I mean, he says like 3 times, save life. So he has this impetus. He goes to the highly evolved man, the very intelligent man, the enlightened human being, save life. Build a boat to survive the flood. Now, I'm going to share with you later on what that boat actually looked like, because in that text, it tells you exactly just like the Bible did, although the Bible's version is this big box. It's basically a big coffin with a house on top of it that probably wouldn't have been very seaworthy. They have very specific instructions on what the boat is to look like and what its shape is. And when I tell you what the shape is and I show you what the boat actually was, because those boats were in use up until very recently for thousands and thousands of years, you will see the symbolism and what it really means. So let's talk about some symbolism for the moment. So I do believe that this myth of the flood does come from a real scenario, because at the end of the ice ages, there would have been massive flooding. And the Mesopotamian floodplain would have been a place that would have been ravaged by perhaps torrential floods. And the rivers that were there were very probably, it could have been tremendously traumatic for the people of that time. And I haven't researched this, so I don't know if I'm right about this or not, but I do know that during the end of the ice ages, not here, I'm not in the United States anymore. In the United States, there were huge floods, crazy huge floods that on scales that we couldn't understand, that went through the West and the Southwest and tore huge canyons out of nowhere, where and what was going on is you have these walls of ice, and these walls of ice that are, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of feet high. I honestly don't know. But within those walls of ice, you have huge underground lakes of supercooled water. This is water that is below freezing, but it's still liquid. And then what happens is that when the ice, these huge, walls of ice start to fall apart, these huge underground, meaning under the ice, lakes of super cooled water, huge amounts of water are released. And this is where the Great Lakes come from. The Great Lakes are the result of that. And there's a body of water in California called the Salton Sea. And it's called the Salton Sea because it is salty. And it's a big salton lake, and that is like the last remnant of the flood that happened as the result of the ice ages and those big ice walls falling apart. And the reason why it's salty is that after it's dried up for thousands of years, the minerals in it get concentrated, and so now it's very salty. But that water that came through actually tore huge canyons and took down mountains. I mean, it would have been, anybody living anywhere near that, if there were cities, even modern cities, would have been completely wiped off the map. So I have no reason to doubt that that happened in the Mesopotamian floodplain at the end of the Ice Ages. So people would have remembered this. And this would have been something that they would have made a myth about. But mythology isn't just a retelling of stories that we may or may not remember. Mythology, true mythology, is channeled information, and the symbolism in it is, if we understand it, helps us to evolve. And this is no different. So bear in mind that Astrahasis, who is the Noah in this, his name is very intelligent man. I'm going to call him the enlightened human. And so, of course, he's going to be like the progenitor of the human race, right? As a result of this. And if you remember, if you follow my channel, the term for human being in the ancient Germanic tongue was man. M-A-N-N, man. It's where we get the word man today. Man today means male human, but in the past, man meant human being, both male and female. If you wanted to say male and female, you said wer, which meant male, and weef, which meant female. But if you wanted to talk about the human race, or mankind, you would call people man. That's why mankind doesn't say man and womankind or humankind. It's man-kind, mankind. The kind, Man means mind. So the idea of humans is that humans are the beings that have mind. What is mind? Mind is not brain. Mind is not intellect. Mind means the reflection of the soul, spirituality. That's why I use the word enlightened, because we have the term of the understanding of enlightenment is when somebody comes into his full spiritual self, and we connect that to the mind and meditation and all of that. So the ancient Germanic understanding was that human beings were man, and the first human who was a king, his name was Manuj. This is true in both the Germanic and the Vedic. In the Vedic, I forget his name, Manu, I believe. Manu. Same thing. He was the first king of the human race, and there are different Manus throughout time, which means the mindset of human beings, right? So here we have the same thing. We have Enki, who is one of the celestial powers, one of the celestial gods, who has been charged with protecting life. He goes to the enlightened human and he tells him to protect life. And here's how you're going to do it. There is a flood coming. You must build a boat, and here is exactly how you are going to build the boat. So bear in mind that flood water represents emotions and it represents baser instinctual responses: fear, anger, lust, greed, as well as any just human emotions in general. And this has to do with the mind, right? Because the mind is jostled around by emotions. This is what meditation is about. The whole idea of meditation is to have a calm mind, and the symbolism for a calm mind is a calm lake, like a mirror, and you can see the stars and the moon reflected in the calm surface of the lake, because that is the symbol of the mind where the emotions are not creating all kinds of waves. Now, a flood is a very specific symbology, because whenever you have a dream, this is, psychological understanding. Whenever you dream at night that you're drowning, it means that you are overwhelmed with emotion, that you have unconscious emotions that you are afraid are going to swallow you up. You're afraid that you're going to drown, you're going to suffocate in all of the emotional torment. And so the flood represents that. The flood represents being overwhelmed with your emotions, being overwhelmed with your baser instinctual emotions like fear and greed and violence and anger and all of those things. And so Enki comes to the enlightened man and says, there is a flood coming. Protect life. And here's how you build your boat. So the boat that he tells Astrahashi to make is not a box. It is a circle. It's like a teacup. It's like a soup bowl. It's just round. Now, to modern ears, that sounds ridiculous. Like, what kind of a boat looks like that? I'm going to show you. Because as it so happens, all over the world, in Europe as well as in Mesopotamia, there is a kind of boat called a coracle. And it looks like this. It's completely round. Now, this is a drawing, but you can go, put coracle in, Coracle. Go type it into Google. You'll see all kinds of real boats that actually existed. And this has been in use for thousands and who knows how many thousands of years. And the interesting thing is that it is very hard to sink that boat because there's nothing for it to catch. And you would think that it wouldn't be a very good boat to use, but actually it is, especially in waterways like rivers. And again, Mesopotamia means land of the rivers. Rivers were a big deal, and up until the middle of the last century, or even beyond that, there were people in Iraq that traveled up and down the Euphrates River in these round boats. And I don't care, and I don't know, but up until very recently, in Ireland even, they use these round boats just to paddle. So this is the boat that Enki tells Astrahashi to make, and tells him to take all of the animals and keep them safe from the flood. Okay, so there's other things that need to be told about this. This is something I just heard recently from a lecture. I was trolling YouTube myself and I heard a lecture about this. That one of the oldest maps, I don't know if it was Babylonian or Assyrian, I can't remember which, but it was a very old tablet that had a map of the world. And of course, it's not a literal map of the world, it's a circle. And in the circle, it has these little things, these little arrows that point up to different areas in the circle, and it says where all different things are. And one of the places that it mentions is it mentions a place called did I write it down? Yeah, Urartu. It mentions the mountains of Urartu. Now, this is where Astrahasi's boat landed, in the mountains of Urartu. So bear in mind now that original mythology of Astrahasi has been retold and rehashed through numerous, through the Assyrians and through the Babylonians and through the Akkadians, and then the Hebrews took it from the Babylonians, and they wrote it as Ararat. Now, if you read it in your Bible, it's going to say that Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. But that's not what it says, because there is a Mount Ararat in Armenia, or I guess now it's Turkey, but there is a Mount Ararat, but it doesn't say that Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. It says it landed on the mountains of Ararat. What that means is that Urartu is not some place that exists on this earth. Because all of the things in that map, that on the edges of the map, it pointed to all these different places, as well as the mountains of Urartu. These are places, mythical places, outside of the boundaries of the circle of the earth. So they saw the earth as a circle. And that these were powerful mythological powers and places like the mountains of the gods and all that were outside of the circle. It would be the same as when we look at the Norse tree of life and the 9 worlds. In the center is Midgard, Middle-jord, our earth. It's like the circle. And then outside of it are all of these branches with all of these other worlds that are connected, but they're not part of our world. So the map on this Babylonian fragment is like that. In the middle is Middle Earth, then Mesopotamia. They basically just wrote the cities of Mesopotamia. And then outside of the circle was all of these mythical places like the mountains of Urartu. So what it means is that when Astrahasi's boat landed, it landed in this mythical place. It didn't land anywhere on this physical earth. For the Hebrews, Mount Ararat was way the hell over there. It was basically like saying, way the hell in Mongolia somewhere. Yeah, Noah's Ark landed in Mongolia somewhere. And again, it's this, rehashing and retelling where the details are lost. And yeah, Mount Ararat. I mean, by the time it gets down to the Noah myth, it's lost all of its understanding and all of the details have changed. And instead of these two gods fighting with each other over whether men and animals should survive, it becomes, Jehovah, who's kind of confused as to, does he want to kill humans or does he want to save them? And that's because, again, the Hebrew elite, when they wrote down this myth, were looking for ways that they could connect to people. People would have heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Canaanites would have been well versed in that. So they took the Epic of Gilgamesh and turned it around and gave it a Hebrew hero who was a servant of the one true God, and it was just another way to tap into them. Just like in Genesis, when they used the word Elohim, it was a way to connect the average person to this new mythology they were creating, which was political propaganda. Nothing other than that. There's no other point for the Old Testament than political propaganda. So, having said that, as you're looking at this circle, what does this mean? This is a myth that is teaching us that the earth, the circle of the earth, the globe of the earth, is in fact the ark. And on that ark and all these land masses that are floating, which at that time they didn't know how many land masses there was, the land and the ocean, that the ark was in fact the earth. And the mythology behind that is that the very intelligent man, the evolved human, is seeking to protect life. That's what this is about. And it's a way of telling a really cool story in a really cool way that allows people to, the floods and the this. And also, it's a way of remembering something that actually did take place, a pretty horrific flood that may have wiped out a bunch of prehistoric civilizations, as far as we know. And at the same time, teaching that the enlightened human who seeks to empower life is the one who receives information from the gods. And the gods will teach you how, like this boat right here, how to seemingly take some strange circular thing that doesn't do anything, which again could be the mind. How to use the mind to ride above the emotions. And all of these are in that myth. So when I heard this understanding, I finally got what that whole thing was about. Because the Epic of Gilgamesh didn't really do a whole heck of a lot for me. Certainly the Noah story didn't do anything for me. It just reinforces a really destructive, Abrahamic monotheists, disempowering nonsense. But when I saw that when you reinterpret the specifics that Enki tells Astrahasis how to build the boat, it turns out to be a giant coracle, because that's what it is. It's like this huge coracle of unbelievable size. That would be, almost impossible, if not impossible, to build. Which clearly we're talking about the earth, that all that water is sitting on, and you create this boat for your mind to float above all of the emotions. Okay? So those are some of my thoughts on the true nature of the ark. If you like the channel, which way? Sorry, everything's backwards. Subscribe this way. Hit the bell button. And if you want to support the channel, you can go to thunderwizard.com and subscribe at whatever level you're comfortable with. If you want to see all of my books, all of my DVDs, all of my teachings, all of my services, you can go to courses.thunderwizard.com. Go and check out neo.thunderwizard.com if you want to see the 4 tools that I believe are necessary to not only be happy and successful, but also to achieve enlightenment and create the world of your dreams. And I'll shut up with this. This month only, August of 2019, 50% off of astrology readings with me. That's a savings of $200. You can save even more if you get a reading from one of my apprentices that I have certified in my specific style of astrology. People have asked me that recently. Do your apprentices, do they do the same reading that you do? Yes, they do. I have trained them to do my specific style of reading, and they follow the same thing. Basically, it's almost like getting a reading from me. Everybody's a little different. I do some things a little bit differently. I may say things a little bit differently. I have a couple things that I have up my sleeve which make me unique, but in terms of the general overall tone and the specifics, it's the same. It's my style of Vedic astrology, and they follow that. So there you go. There's some stuff for you to think about. All right, we'll see how many really angry fundamentalist Christians show up to get all upset at this. But that's it for me. I'll talk to you guys very soon. Take care.